second from these creating ones to the sphere of human history. The emanations have condensed and the field of consciousness constricted. Where formerly causal bodies were visible, now only their secondary effects come to focus in the little hard fact pupil of the human eye. The cosmogonic cycle is now to be carried forward, therefore, not by the gods who have become invisible, but by the heroes, more or less human in character, through whom the world destiny is realized. This is the line where created myths begin to give place to legend, as in the books of Genesis. Following the expulsion from the garden, metaphysics yields to prehistory, which is dim and vague at first, but becomes gradually precise in detail. The hero becomes less and less fabulous, until at last, in the final stages of the various local traditions, legend opens into the common daylight of recorded time. Muhudzi the Moon Man was cut loose like a fouled anchor, and the community of the children floated free into the day world of the waking consciousness. But we are told that there existed amongst them direct sons of the now submarine father, who, like the children of his first begetting, had grown from infancy to manhood in a single day. These special carriers of cosmic power constituted a spiritual and social aristocracy. Filled with a double charge of the creative energy, they were themselves sources of revelation. Such figures appeared on the dawn stage of every legendary past. They are the culture heroes, the city founders. The Chinese chronicles record when the earth had solidified and the people were settling into the riverlands. Fu Sui, the heavenly emperor, governed himself and taught his tribes how to fish with nets, to hunt, and to rear domestic animals, divided the people into clans and instituted matrimony. From a supernatural tablet entrusted to him by a horse-shaped scalar monster, one of the waters of the river Meng, he deduced the 8 diagrams which remain to this day the fundamental symbols of traditional Chinese thought. He had been born of a miraculous conception, often after a gesture of 12 years, his body being that of a serpent with human arms and the head of an ox. Shang Nung, his successor, the earthly emperor, was 8 feet 7 inches tall with a human body, but the head of a bull. He had been miraculously conceived through the influence of a dragon. The embarrassed mother had exposed her infant on a mountainside, but the wild beasts protected and nourished it, and when she learned of this, she fetched him home. Shang Nung discovered in one day 70 poisonous plants and their antidotes. Through a glass covering to his stomach, he could observe the digestion of each herb. Then he composed a pharmacopoeia that is still in use. He was the inventor of the plow and the system of barter. He is worshipped by the Chinese peasant as the prince of cereals. At the age of 168, he was joined to the immortals. Such serpent kings and minotaurs tell of a past when the emperor was the carrier of a special world-creating, world-sustaining power, very much greater than that represented in the normal human psyche. In those times it was accomplished the heaven titan work, the massive establishment of the foundations of our human civilization. But with the progress of the cycle, a period came when the world to be done was no longer proto or superhuman. It was the labor specifically of a man, control of the passions, exploration of the arts, elaboration of the economic and cultural institutions of the state. Now is required no incarnation of the moon bull, no serpent wisdom of the 8 diagrams of destiny, but a perfect human spirit alert to the needs and hopes of the heart. Accordingly, the cosmogonic cycle yields an emperor in human form, who shall stand for all generations to come as the model of man, the king. Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, was the third of the august 3. His mother, a concubine of the prince of the province of Jiaotian, conceived him when she sleep, he could visit the remotest regions and consort with immortals in the supernatural realm. Shortly following his elevation to the throne, Huang Ti fell into a dream that lasted 3 entire months, during which time he learned the lesson of the control of the heart. After a second dream of comparable length, he returned with the power to teach the people. He had instructed them in the control of the forces of nature in their own hearts. This wonderful man governed China for 100 years, and during his reign, the people enjoyed a veritable golden age. He gathered 6 great ministers around him with whom he helped compose a calendar, inaugurated mathematical calculations, and taught the making of utensils of wood, pottery, and metal, the building of boats and carriages, the use of money, and the construction of musical instruments of bamboo. He appointed public places for the worship of God. He instituted bounds and laws of private property. His queen discovered the arts of weaving silk. He planted 100 varieties of grain, vegetable, and trees, favored the development of birds, quadrupeds, reptiles, and insects, taught the uses of water, fire, wood, and earth, and regulated the movement of the tides. Before his death at the age of 111, the phoenix and the unicorn appeared in the gardens of the empire in attenuation to the perfection of his reign. The second section is titled Childhood of the Human Hero. The earlier culture hero of the snake body and the bull head carried within him from birth the spontaneous creative power of the natural world. That was the meaning of his form. The man-hero, on the other hand, must descend to re-establish connection with the infrahuman. This is the sense, as we have seen, of the adventure of the hero. But the makers of legend have seldom rested content to regard the world's great heroes as mere human beings who broke past the horizons that limited their fellows and returned with such boons as any man with equal faith and courage might have found. On the contrary, the tendency has always been to endow the human with extraordinary powers from the moment of birth or even the moment of conception. The whole hero life is shown to have been a pageant of marvels, with a great central adventure as its culmination. This accords with the view that herohood is predestined rather than simply achieved, and opens the problem of the relationship of biography to character. Jesus, for example, can be regarded as a man who, by dint of austerities and meditation, attained wisdom, or on the other hand, one may believe that a god descended and took upon himself the enactment of a human career. The first view would lead one to imitate the master literally in order to break through in the same way as he to the transcendent redemptive experience. But the second state that the hero is rather a symbol to be contemplated than an example to be literally followed. The divine being is a revelation of the omnipotent self, which dwells within us all. The contemplation of the life thus should be undertaken as a meditation on one's own immanent divinity, not as a prelude to precise imitation. The lesson being not to do thus and be good, but know this and be God. In part 1, The Adventure of the Hero, we regarded the redemptive deed from the first standpoint, which may be called the psychological. We now must describe it from the second, where it becomes a symbol of the same metaphysical mystery that it was the deed of the hero himself to recover and bring to view. In the present chapter, therefore, we shall consider first the miraculous childhood, by which it is shown that a special manifestation of the immanent divine principle has become incarnate in the world, and then in succession the various life roles through which the hero may enact his work of destiny. These vary in magnitude according to the needs of time. Stated in the terms already formulated, the hero's first task is to experience consciously the antecedent stages of the cosmogonic cycle, to break back through the epochs of second, then, is to return from that abyss to the plane of contemporary life, there to serve as a human transformer of the demiurgic potentials. Huang Ti had the power to dream. This was his road of descent and return. Vanamoan's second or water birth threw him back to an experience of the elemental. In the Tonga tale of the clam wife, the retreat began with the birth of the mother. The brother hero sprang from an infrahuman womb. The deeds of the hero in the second part of this personal cycle will be proportionate to the depth of his descent during the first. The sons of the clam wife came up from the animal level. Their physical beauty was superlative. Vanamoan was reborn from the elemental waters and winds. His endowment was to rouse or quell with bardic song the elements of nature and of the human body. Huang Ti sojourned in the kingdom of the spirit. He taught the harmony of the heart. The Buddha broke past even the zone of the creative gods and came back from the void. He announced salvation from the cosmogonic round. If the deeds of an actual historical figure proclaim him to have been a hero, the builders of his legend will invent for him appropriate adventures in depth. These will be pictured as journeys into miraculous realms and are to be interpreted as symbolic on the one hand of descents into the night sea of the psyche, and on the other of the realms or aspects of men's destiny that are made manifest in the respective lives. King Sargon of Argate was born of lowly mother. His father was unknown. Set adrift in a basket of bulrushes on the waters of the Euphrates, he was discovered by Aki, the husbandman who he brought up to serve as gardener. The goddess Ishtar favored the youth. Thus he became at last king and emperor, renowned as the living god. Chandragupta, the founder of the Hindu Mora destiny, was abandoned in an earthen jar at the threshold of a cowshed. A herdsman discovered and fostered the infant. One day, when he was playing with his companions a game of high king in the judgment seat, little Chandragupta commanded that the worst of the offenders should have their hands and feet cut off. Then, at his word, the amputated members immediately returned to place. A passing prince, beholding the miraculous game, brought the child for 1,000 hashpanas, and at home discovered by physical signs that he was a Maurya. Pope Gregory the Great was born of noble twins who, at the instigation of the devil, had committed incest. His penitent mother set him to sea in a little casket. He was found and fostered by fishermen, and at the age of 6 was sent to a cloister to be educated as a priest. But he desired the life of a knightly warrior. Entering a boat, he was borne miraculously to the country of his parents, where he won the hand of the queen, who presently moved to be his mother. After discovery of his second incest, Gregory remained 17 years in penance, chained to the rock in the middle of the sea. The keys to the chains were tossed to the waters, but when at the end of the long period they were discovered in the belly of a fish, this was taken to be a providential sign. The penitent was conducted to Rome, where in due course he was elected pope. Charlemagne was persecuted as a child by his elder brothers and took flight to Saracen Spain. There, under the name of Manet, he rendered signal services to the king. He converted the king's daughter to the Christian faith, and the two secretly arranged to marry. After further deeds, the royal youth returned to France, where he overthrew his former persecutors and triumphantly assumed the crown. Then he ruled 100 years, surrounded by a zodiac of 12 peers. According to all reports, his beard and hair were very long and white. One day, sitting under his judgment tree, he rendered justice to a snake, and in gratitude the herdsman, the ageless emperor died, but he slept only to awake in the hour of his country's need. During the later Middle Ages, he once arose from the dead to participate in a crusade. Each of these biographies exhibits the variously rationalized theme of the infant exile and return. This is a prominent feature in all legend, folktale, and myth. Usually an effort is made to give it some semblance of physical plausibility. However, when the hero in question is a great patriarch, wizard, prophet, or incarnation, the wonders are permitted to develop beyond all bounds. The popular Hebrew legend of the birth of Father Abraham supplies an example of the frankly supernatural infant exile. The event of the birth had been read by Nimrod in the stars, for this impious king was a cunning astrologer, and it was manifest to him that a man would be born on his day who would rise up against him and triumphantly give the lie to his religion. In his terror at the fate foretold him in the stars, he sent for his princes and governors and asked them to advise him in the matter. They answered and said, "Our unanimous advice is that thou shouldst build a great house, station a guard at the entrance thereof, and make known in the whole of thy realm that all pregnant women shall repair thither, together with their midwives, who are to remain with them when they are delivered. When the days of the women to be delivered are fulfilled, and the child is born, it shall be the duty of the midwife to kill it, if it is a boy. But if the child be a girl, it shall be kept alive, and the mother shall receive gifts and costly garments, and a herald shall proclaim, Thus is done unto women who bears a daughter." The king was pleased with this counsel, and he had a proclamation published throughout his holy kingdom, summoning all the architects to build a great house for him, 60 ells high and 80 ells wide. After it was completed, he issued a second proclamation summoning all pregnant women thither, and there they were to remain until their confinement. Officers were appointed to take the women to the house, and the guards were stationed in it and about it to prevent the women from escaping thence. He furthermore sent midwives to the house and commanded them to slay the men children at their mothers' breasts. But if a woman bore a girl, she was to be arrayed in byssus and silks and embroidered garments, and led forth from the house of detention amid great honors. No less than 70,000 children were slaughtered thus. Then the angels appeared before God and spoke, "Seest thou not what he doth, yon sinner and blasphemer, Nimrod, son of Canaan, who slays so many innocent babes that have done no harm?" God answered and said, "Ye holy angels, I know it and I see it, for I neither slumber nor sleep. I behold and I know the secret things and the things that are revealed, and ye shall witness what I will do unto this sinner and blasphemer, for I will turn my hand against him to chastise him." It was about this time that Terah espoused the mother of Abraham, and she was with child. When her time approached, she left the city in great terror and wandered towards the desert, walking along the edge of a valley until she happened across a cave. She entered this refuge, and on the next day she was seized with the throes, and she gave birth to a son. The whole cave was filled with the light of the child's countenance, as with the splendor of the sun, and the mother rejoiced exceedingly. The babe she bore was our father Abraham. His mother lamented and said to her son, "Alas, that I bore thee at a time when Nimrod is king. For thy sake 70,000 men children were slaughtered, and I am seized with terror on account of thee, that he hear of thy existence and slay thee. Better thou shouldst perish here in this cave than my hand I should behold thee dead at my breast." She took the garment in which she was clothed and wrapped the boy. Then she abandoned him in the cave, saying, those stars could be seen no longer. And then he said, I will not pay worship to these, for they are no gods. Thereupon the sun came forth, and he spoke, This is my God, him I will extol. But again the sun set, and he said, He is no God. And beholding the moon, he called him his God, to whom he would pay divine homage. Then the moon was obscured, and he cried out, This too is no God. There is one who sets them all in motion. The Blackfeet of Montana tell of a young monster slayer, Kut Oyis, who was discovered by his foster parents when the old man and woman put a clot of buffalo blood to boil in a pot. Immediately there came from the pot a noise as if a child crying, as if it were being heard, burnt or scalded. They looked in the kettle and saw there a little boy, and they quickly took it out of the water. They were very much surprised. Now on the fourth day the child spoke and said, Lash me in turn to each of these lodge poles, and when I get to the last one, I shall fall out of my lashing and be grown up. The old woman did so, and she lashed him to each lodge pole. He could be seen to grow, and finally, when they lashed him to the last pole, he was a man. The folk tales commonly support or supplant this theme of the exile with that of the despised one or the handicapped. The abused youngest son or daughter, the orphan, stepchild, ugly duckling, or the squire of low degree. A young Pueblo woman who was helping her mother mix clay for pottery for her food felt a splash of mud on her leg when she thought nothing more of it. After some days the girl felt something move in her belly, but she did not think anything about going to have a baby. She did not tell her mother, but it was growing and growing. One day in the morning she was very sick, and in the afternoon she got the baby. Then her mother knew for the first time that her daughter was going to have a baby. The mother was very angry about it, but after she looked at the baby she saw it was not like a baby. She saw it was a round thing with two things sticking out. It was a little jar. Where did you get this? Said her mother. The girl was just crying. About that time the father came in. Never mind, I am very glad to see she has a baby, he said. But it is not a baby, said her mother. Then the father went to look at it and saw that it was a little water jar. After that he was very fond of that little jar. It is moving, he said. Pretty soon that little water jar was growing. In 20 days it was big. It was able to walk around with the children, and it could talk. Grandfather, take me outdoors so I can look around, he said. So every morning the grandfather would take him out, and he would look at the children, and they were very fond of him, and they found out he was a boy. Water jar boy, they found out from his talking. In some, the child of destiny has the face a long period of obscurity. This is a time of extreme danger, impediment, or disgrace. He is thrown inward to his own depths or outward to the unknown. Either way, what he touches is a darkness unexplored, and this is a zone of unsuspected presences, benign as well as malignant. An angel appears, a helpful animal, a fisherman, a hunter, a crone, a peasant, fostered in the animal school, or like Siegfried, below ground among the gnomes that nourish the roots of the tree of life, or again alone in some little room. The story has been told 1,000 ways. The young world apprentice learns the lesson of the seed powers, which reside just beyond the sphere of the measured and the named. The myths agree that an extraordinary capacity is required to face and survive such experience. The infancies abound in anecdotes of precious strength, cleverness, and wisdom. Heracles strangled a serpent and sent against his cradle by the goddess Hera. Maui of Polynesia snared and slowed the sun to give his mother time to cook her meals. Abraham, as we have seen, arrived at the knowledge of the one God. Jesus confounded the wise men. The baby Buddha had been asleep. He was forever climbing to eat and spill things placed out at his reach on the high shelves. The girls would call him Butter Thief and complain to Yusoda, but he could always invent a story. One afternoon, when he was playing in the yard, his foster parent was warned that he was eating clay. She arrived with a switch, but he had wiped his lips and denied all knowledge of the matter. She opened the dirty mouth to see, but when she peered inside, she beheld the whole universe, the three worlds. She thought, how silly am I to imagine that my son could be the lord of the three worlds. Then all was veiled from her again, and the moment passed immediately from her mind. She fondled the little boy and took him home. The herding folk were accustomed to pay worship to the god Indra, the Hindu counterpart of Zeus, king of heaven and lord of rain. One day when they had made their offering, the lad Krishna said to them, Indra is no supreme deity. Though he be king in heaven, he is afraid of the Titans. Furthermore, the rain and prosperity for which you are praying depend on the sun, which draws upon the waters and makes them fall again. What can Indra do? Whatever comes to pass is determined by the laws of nature and the spirit. Then he turned their attention to the nearby woods, streams, and hills, and especially to Mount Govardhan, and more worthy of their honor than the remote master of the air. And so they offered flowers and fruits and sweetmeats to the mountain. Krishna himself assumed a second form. He took the form of a mountain god and received the offerings of the people, meanwhile remaining in his earlier shape among them, paying worship to the mountain king. The god received the offerings and ate them up. Indra was enraged and sent for the king of the clouds, whom he commanded to pour rain over the people until all should be swept away. A flight of storm clouds drew over the district and began to discharge a deluge. It seemed the end of the world was at hand, but the lad Krishna filled Mount Govardhan with the heat of his inexhaustible energy, lifted it with his little finger, and bid the people take shelter beneath. The rain struck the mountain, hissed, and evaporated. The torrent fell 7 days, but not a drop touched the community of herdsmen. Then the god realized that the opponent must be an incarnation of the primal being. When Krishna went out the next day to graze, the cows playing music on his flute, and the king of heaven came down on his great white elephant, Airavata, fell on his face at the feet of the smiling lad and made submission. The conclusion of the childhood cycle is the return or recognition of the hero, when after the long period of obscurity his true character is revealed. This event may precipitate a considerable crisis, for it amounts to an emergence of powers hitherto excluded from human life. Earlier patterns break to fragments or dissolve. Disaster greets the eye, yet after a moment of apparent havoc, the creative value of the new factor comes to view, and the world takes shape again in unsuspected glory. The theme of the crucifixion resurrection can be illustrated either on the body of the hero himself or in the effects upon his world. The first alternative we find in the Pueblo story of the water jar. The men were going out to hunt rabbits, and Water Jar Boy wanted to go. Grandfather, could you take me to the foot of the mesa? I want to hunt rabbits. Poor grandson, you can't hunt rabbits. You have no legs or arms, said the grandfather. But Water Jar Boy was very anxious to go. Take me anyway. You are too old and you can't do anything. His mother was crying because her boy had no legs or arms or eyes, but they used to feed him in his mouth, in the mouth of the jar. So the next morning his grandfather took him down to the south on the flat. Then he rolled along, and pretty soon he saw a rabbit track, and he followed the track. Pretty soon the rabbit ran out, and he began to chase it. Just before he got to the marsh there was a rock, and he hit himself against it and broke, and a boy jumped out. He was very glad his rage would suddenly burst like an eruption, both overwhelming himself and smashing everything around. When he was 4 years old, so the story goes, he set out to test the boy corpse of his uncle, King Kokobar, at their own sports, carrying his hurley of brass, ball of silver, throwing javelin, and toy spear. He proceeded to the court city of Emania, where without so much as a word of permission he dived right in amongst the boys, thrice 50 in number, who were hurling on the green and practicing martial exercises with Concobar's son Falamain at their head. The whole field let it fly at him. With his fists, forearms, palms, and little shield, he parried the hurleys, balls, and spheres that came simultaneously from all directions. Then, for the first time in his life, he was seized with his battle frenzy, a bizarre, characteristic transformation later to be known as his distortion, and before anyone could grasp what was coming to pass, he had laid low 50 of the best. 5 more of the boys' corps went scuttling past the king, where he sat playing chess with Fergus the Eloquent. Kokobar arose and took a hand in the confusion, but Cuchulainn would not lighten his hand until all the youngsters had been placed under his protection and guarantee. Cuchulainn's first day under arms was the occasion of his full self-manifestation. There was nothing serenely controlled about this performance, nothing of the playful irony that we feel in the deeds of the Hindu Krishna. Rather, the abundance of Cuchulainn's power was becoming known for the first time to himself, as well as to everybody else. It broke out of the depths of his being, and then he had to be dealt with, impromptu and fast. The happening was again at the court of Concobar the day Cathabed, the Druid, declared in prophecy of any stripling who that day should assume arms and armature, that the name of such an one would transcend those of all Ireland's youths besides. His life, however, would be fleeting short. Cuchulainn forthwith demanded fighting equipment, 17 sets of weapons given him. He shattered with his strength until Kokobar invested him with his own outfit. Then he reduced the chariots to fragments. Only that of the king was strong enough to support his trial. Cuchulainn commanded Concobar's charioteer to drive him past the distant lookout ford, and they came presently to a remote fortress, the Dun of Sons of Nectan, where they cut off the heads of the defenders. He fastened the heads to the sides of the car. On the road back he jumped to the ground, and by sheer running and mere speed captured 2 stags of the grandest bulk. With 2 stones he knocked out the air of 24 flying swans, and with thongs and other gear he tethered all, both the beasts and the birds, to the chariot. Levacar and the prophetess beheld the pageant with alarm as it approached the city and castle of Emania. The chariot is graced with bleeding heads of his enemies, she declared. Beautiful white birds he is, which in the chariot bear him company, and wild unbroken stags bound and tethered to the same. I know that chariot fighter, the king said, even the little boy, my sister's son, who this very day went to the marches. Surely he will have reddened his hand, and should his fury not be timely met, all Emania's young men will perish by him. Very quickly a method had to be contrived to abate his heat, and one was found. 150 women of the castle, and Scanlach, their leader, at the head of them, reduced themselves critically to nature's garb, and without subterfuge of any kind, trooped out to meet him. The little warrior, embarrassed or perhaps overwhelmed by such a display of womanhood, averted his eyes, at which moment he was seized by the men and soused into a vat of cold water. The staves and hoops of the vessel flew asunder. A second vat boiled, and the third became only very hot. Thus Cuchulainn was subdued, and the city saved. A beautiful boy indeed was that, 7 toes to each foot. Cuchulainn had in either hand as many fingers. His distortion, he became a fearsome and multiform, wondrous and hitherto unknown being. All over him, from his crown to the ground, his flesh and every limb, joint and point and articulation of him quivered. His feet, shins, and knees shifted themselves and were behind him. The frontal sinews of his head were dragged to the back of his neck, where they showed in lumps bigger than the head of a man-child aged 1 month. One eye became engulfed in his head so far that 'tis a question whether a wild heron could have got at it where it lay against his occiput, to drag it out upon the surface of his cheek. The other eye, on the contrary, protruded suddenly, and it itself so rested upon the cheek. His mouth was twisted awry till it met his ears. Flakes of fire streamed from it, and the sounding blows of the heart that pounded within him were as the howl of a bad dog doing his office, or of a lion in the act of charging bears. Among the aerial clouds over his head were visible the virulent pouring showers and sparks of ruddy fire, which the seething of his savage wrath caused to mount upon above him. His hair became tangled about his head, and over which the prime apple tree had been shaken. Yet may we surmise that never an apple of them would have reached the ground, but rather that all would have been held impaled, each on an individual hair, as it bristled on him for fury. His hero's distortion projected itself out of his forehead, and showed longer as well as thicker than the whetstone of a first-mate man-at-arms, and finally taller, thicker, more rigid. Longer than the mast of a great ship was the perpendicular jet of dusky blood which out of his scalp very central point shot upwards, and then was scattered to the 4 cardinal points, whereby was formed a magic mist of gloom, resembling the smoky pall that drapes a regal dwelling, what time a king at nightfall of winter's day draws near to it.